How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Zayin, Daf 67 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Friends. What did we get up to? Okay. Alright. Yeah. What can I tell you? I think it's going to be a hard daf. Just Ezu Neshech, there's I guess there's just a lot of stuff that isn't on the page. There's a lot of explaining to do and kind of setting up how things work. And anyways, so whatever. Let's just jump in. I'm gonna start on explaining how a situation is really ribbis and what's the catch. There's some kind of loan situation and it's all right, so what's the catch here? Why is this ribbis? And what kind of ribbis is it? And let me clean my glasses. Anyways, okay, here we go. We're going to start in Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, about 10 lines or so into the page. Itza de Amr Le'au Gavra. Alright, so there was a woman. Her name was, what was her name? Who could tell me her name? Her name was Navla. Itza de Amr Le'au Gavra. There was a fellow named Navla, and she said to a messenger, Zils vainly, Are mikrivoy, will you go over to my relative? And it's getting loud up here. It's getting really, it's like phones going off. Who keeps on calling? Anyways, so Navla says to this messenger, hey, can you go and buy some property from my relative? Okay. Also Zavanla. So he went to the relative and he bought some property from the relative. Omar lay, and the relative said to the messenger, Nihavu li zuze mehadras lo niali. And the relative says to the messenger, hey, I want to get this property back. When I have the money, will Navla sell it back to me? Okay, I don't know. So Navla went and bought some property from the relative for $1,000, and the relative says, "Hey, the relative says to the messenger, hey, do you reckon that when I have $1,000, I'll be able to buy it back from Navla?" Amalei, and the messenger says, "Ad v'Navla, ache." Well, you and Navla are family, are mishpache. I'm sure you'll be able to figure something out. Rabbi BavaMetzia says, Rabbi BavaMetzia, kol at v'Navla ache. So when you say at v'Navla ache, you skip the next word, sam chadaite v'logomer makne, that when the relative hears, the messenger says that, it's a good sign, right? That's a good point. Me and Navla, we're mishpache, we're relatives, right? I'm sure we'll be able. That's true. I'm sure we will be able to work out something. And then he doesn't really sell it to her wholeheartedly. He kind of just assumes that it'll be like a revolving door to an extent that, she'll sell him. He'll sell her the property, and when he has $1,000 available, she'll sell it back to him. So now the Gemara says, Ara Hadra Pere Mai. Now here's the thing. So when he buys it back from her, so he'll get the land back. What about the fruits? Because here's the thing. It basically becomes kind of like a loan. Meaning so what's happening? Kind of what's happening is Navla is giving, essentially, it's kind of like Navla is giving him $1,000 as a loan because he needs money and he's going out, and he's spending it or whatever. And then when he gets the $1,000, he's basically gonna give it back to her. Now, in the meantime, she's eating from the property. So now, what happens in terms of ribbis? Meaning again, she's buying the field. He's saying, "Hey, can I get it back when I have the money?" So it's kind of like she's loaning him $1,000. He then pays her back the $1,000, but she's also been eating, right? And he gets back the field, but she's also been eating from the field during this time. So he's basically paying her back the $1,000 that he borrowed in that sense, plus the fruits that she ate. So now what happens? Now what happens? What happens to the what happens to those fruits? Ribis ktsutza avu v'yotzin bidayonin. Would we say that it's basically ribis ktsutza, that it's ribis on a loan, that she basically lent him $1,000 and she's getting paid back $1,000 plus the fruits that she ate, and maybe the court can force her to pay him for the fruits that she ate, that she would have to return the ribis, the interest. Or perhaps ki avuk ribis havu, or maybe it's treated like avuk ribis. Maybe it's treated like ribis d'Rabbanan, that it's more like a sale, right? That it's more like a that the avuk ribis applies to ribis that applies to sales, and not strictly loans. And primarily, this was a sale of a house, and meaning ribis ktsutza is in the context of loans, right? And avuk ribis is in the context of basically anything else. And here, this was primarily a sale of a property, so therefore it should be avuk ribis ve'en yotzin, and Bezdin would not be able to force her to pay the relative for the fruits. Amarabba bar Rav Huna mistavra ki avuk ribis havu ve'en yotzin b'dayonin. Rabbi bar Rav Huna says that in his opinion, it is avuk ribis, and Bezdin cannot force her to pay the relative for the fruits. V'chein Omar Rava ki avuk ribis havu ve'en yotzin b'dayonin. Rava Oichit says that it would be considered avuk ribis, and Bezdin would be unable to make her pay for the fruits that she ate. Omle Abaye l'Rabba, Abaye says to Rabba, mashkanto mai. What about a mashkanto? And this is basically going to be the subject of, I think, essentially the rest of the daf, I think. Wait 1 second. So what's a mashkanta? Where am I? Lost my place. Sorry, just whatever. Okay, where am I? Okay, mashkanta, fine. So what's a mashkanta? You can tell me what that is. A mashkanta. Okay, so a mashkanta is basically. So here's the thing. We it's like everything's relative. It depends how you kind of like describe it. So we can kind of describe a mashkanta as the same scenario as what was her name? Navla and her relative, by like kind of flipping it inside out. Meaning by Navla and her relative, it was primarily a property sale, but we kind of like flipped it, kind of like threw the loan angle in and the ribis angle in. Here, this is primarily, a loan, but we can kind of like, we can kind of like compare it to the similar case with Navla. In that, what's a mashkanta? Mashkanta is that Shimon lends Reuven $1,000, okay, and Reuven gives Shimon a field as collateral. So Shimon lends Reuven $1,000. Reuven pays back Shimon $1,000. Now, in the meantime, Shimon had Reuven's field as a collateral and he was eating the fruits. So how do we view this? Like, in a certain sense, it's similar to the situation with Navla, where we said that we viewed her property purchase from her cousin as a loan, since he then bought it back from her. So it was kind of like he lent the cousin. It's kind of like she lent the cousin $1,000 plus she ate from the fruits. So that would be similar to this scenario where Shimon lent Reuven $1,000 and he got paid back $1,000 plus he ate from the fruits. So by Navla we said it would be avak ribis. Well, would we say that by the mashkanta also it would be considered like avak ribis? But by the mashkanta it's much more of a loan scenario, right? It's really starting out as a loan. So how do we view this? So what happens when there's a loan and then there's a property as a collateral? How does that compare to the scenario with Navla, which primarily started out as a property purchase, but then it sort of took on this whole loan angle, and if you kind of view it from the angle of the loan, then it's very similar to a mashkanta. So Hasam time amai, what's pshat over there? Why we say that by by Navla we say it's avak ribis. Mishum delo kotzle, because they didn't specify any kind of ribis. Meaning, what's classic? So what's textbook ribis? That milichatchila it's specified, right? I'm going to lend you $1,000. You're going to pay me back in 6 months $1,200. So they made it very clear that there's going to be an interest angle over here. By Navla, there was no interest angle that was made clear, right? There was she basically sold. She bought a property from her cousin. Cousin bought it back. In the meantime, she was eating the fruits. There was never like, these fruits are going to be interest. Like that was never made clear. So because the interest was never, made clear, like there was interest over here, like you're going to pay me back more than I gave you, right? There was no like specific interest specifically baked into the arrangement. So therefore, it's not considered ribis kitzutza. It's avak ribis. Hachanami. And here also, there was never anything specified in the arrangement with the mashkanta, with the property, that Shimon was going to eat from it, and that was going to be ribis. So in that respect, also it should be considered avak ribis, and Ruvain and Bezdin should be unable to make Shimon pay back Ruvain for the fruits that he ate. Right? So Chanami lo katzle, there was nothing specified. Odilmor, perhaps Hosam zavine ochava. Or perhaps by the situation of Navla, it really primarily started as a purchase, right? As a purchase of property. She was interested in buying her cousin's property. It then took on this sort of ended up taking on this kind of loan angle, but really primarily was a purchase. Whereas Hoch Alva, here it's primarily a loan, and therefore maybe it should be ribis ktsutsa. Amalei. So Rabba answers, Hosam taimamai mishum de lo kotzle, hochanami lo kotzle. No, so says Rabba that his opinion is that by Navla it was because there was no interest that was explicitly specified, and therefore that there was no interest that was explicitly specified, and therefore. And therefore it's avak ribis, and the same thing would be over here as well. By the mashkanta, there was no interest that was specifically specified, and therefore it would be avak ribis, and it would not be. You can't make Shimon pay it back. Amar Papi says Papi Avad Ravina Uvda that there was a case that came before Ravina v'chashiv v'apik pere, and he actually did extract the fruits, and thereby, I assume it's talking about a mashkanta. Let me just double check. No, sorry, it's talking about an actual field. Like it says, Delo Karaba by Rav Huna. Let me just see something quick. Okay, fine. Anyways, so where am I? So Ava Uvda v'chashiv v'apik pere. What? Amar Papi Avad Ravina Uvda v'chashiv v'apik pere. Right, that in the situation of Navla and her cousin, the question was, how do we treat it? Do we treat it as ribis ktsutza or avak ribis? Rabbi Bar Funa said that we treat it like avak ribis. Ravina, however, paskin that it was ribis ktsutza, and we and he extracted the fruits from the fruit eater. Okay, unlike Rabbi Bar Funa. Let me just check the time and make sure. Okay, I have another hour. I wonder if it'll take another hour. It very much might. That's been kind of where we're at these days. Okay, fine. Okie dokie, where are we? Okie dokie. Okay, this is big stuff over here. This is big stuff over here. Big stuff. All right. Chayver, listen up. My lips have been so dry. All right, listen up, friends. Okay. Okay, mashkanta. Okay. Shimon lends $1,000 to Ruvain. Okay. Ruvain needs to pay back Shimon $1,000. Fine. Ruvain then makes a field collateral on the loan. Okay, fine. Now, there are basically two ways to go about relating to this scenario, to this setup. Shimon lends $1,000 to Reuven. Reuven needs to pay back Shimon, but also there's a mashkanta a field that was pledged on the loan. One way, one kind of, meaning not one way to view it, but like one way that it was actually, like in some places they would do it this way, in some places they would do it the other way. One way that they would do it was that Reuven could pay back the loan. Or how about let me actually do it the other way. The other way, I think it'll be easy. That's kind of the easier one. Let's start off with that. So, Shimon would lend Reuven $1,000, and then they would Reuven would have provide a mashkanta, right? He would have this property that was pledged to the loan, and there would be a predetermined amount of time, let's say 3 years. During those 3 years, it belongs to Shimon, the lender. Reuven cannot pay back the loan early and get back his field. No. The way that the mashkanta works in these places is that Shimon lends $1,000 to Reuven, and Reuven provides a mashkanta for a certain amount of time, let's say 3 years, and he cannot pay back the loan or get back his field for 3 years. After 3 years, he pays back the field, he pays back his loan, and he gets back his field. Now, basically, the way that we view this is that essentially Shimon is buying the field, right? Shimon lends Reuven $1,000. Shimon is basically buying Reuven's field for $1,000 for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, Reuven buys it back from Shimon. Now, during those 3 years, it's Shimon's. He bought it for 3 years. It belongs to Shimon. He can eat the fruits, of course, and it's completely his. That's one way to do it, right? That is a place where you can't, where Reuven cannot repay the loan early and evict Shimon from his field. No, Shimon essentially buys Reuven's field from him for the price of the loan for a predetermined amount of time, and it belongs to Shimon during that time, after which Reuven then buys it back from Shimon by repaying the loan. And it entirely belongs to Shimon during that time. Now, the other way that mashkanta would be implemented was, of course, that Reuven can pay back the loan at any time, and when he repays the loan, he gets his field back. Now, in that sense, it still remains. So Shimon is not buying the field from Reuven. It's still very much, it's Reuven's field, I guess. And if Shimon eats from the field, then we have to be concerned about ribis. He doesn't own the field. Shimon doesn't own the field, and if he's lending Reuven $1,000 and getting paid back $1,000, and he also ate from the field, so then it gets complicated with like ribis. Okay. All right, so those are kind of the two ways to kind of that mashkanta was implemented. So now let's read this inside. Omar, my brother. Let me just make sure I didn't skip. Yeah, okay. Omar, my brother of Yosef Mishmei Derave. All right, this is my brother of Yosef Mishmei Derave. Homashkanta. When it comes to mashkanta, be'asra de misalke. So in places like the second way I explained, in places where Reuven could pay back the loan at any time and evict Shimon at any time from his property by paying him back. Ochal shiur zuze misal kinon lei. Okay, so that's interesting. So what happens if Shimon eats from Reuven's mashkanta, from his field? He eats so much that from the field that he ate $1,000 worth from the field. So now there's two kind of, Shimon and Reuven are going to have differing views on how this situation should be approached. Shimon's view is going to be, well, it's ribis, it's interest. I know I'm a bad guy. Shimon says, I lent Reuven $1,000. Reuven obviously is going to have to pay me back $1,000. By eating from this field, it's ribis, right? I'm in addition to being repaid for the loan, I'm also eating fruits. I'm a bad guy. But at the end of the day, it's ribis. It's avok ribis, because it wasn't specified in advance that I can eat from this, right, that this was going to be part of the loan. It's avok ribis. It can't be collected from me. It can't, so, I still am entitled to get repaid for the loan. Yeah, I ate from the field. I'm a bad guy, but Beis Din can't take that away from me because it's avok ribis. Whereas Ruvain is going to want to make the argument that I would like for Beis Din to evaluate how much it is that Shimon ate, and if it equals $1,000 worth of produce, that should be considered like I've then repaid him via my produce for the loan, and we're done now. The loan's done. So those are kind of the two ways to look at it. So starting from the beginning, so in places where Ruvain can pay Shimon at any time and evict him from his field, if Shimon eats the equivalent of how much he lent to Ruvain, and now he ate that amount from Ruvain's field, misalkinan lei, they're even. Ruvain is considered to have paid back his loan, and we evict Shimon from the field. We evict Shimon from the field. We evict Shimon from the field. So we view it like the way that kind of Ruvain wants to view it, which is that we should evaluate how much Shimon has eaten, and if it equals 1,000, we say, okay, the loan has been repaid. Shimon, get off the field. Ochal tfei, what if Shimon ate more than the value of the loan? He ate $1,500 worth of produce. So now here's the thing. Technically speaking, once he hit $1,000 worth of produce, Ruvain should have kicked him off the field, but he didn't, which means that in a certain sense he was kind of like not consenting, but he was complicit or something in Shimon's ribis taking, right? Because at that point he should have said, like Ruvain should have said, hey, the loan's repaid, get out of here. But he kind of allowed Shimon to stay there and keep eating extra, which is ribis, and it's avok ribis, and Beis Din can't force Shimon to do anything with that avok ribis, right? Meaning, because we're saying that we're viewing what he ate as money, and that basically the loan's been repaid, and Shimon's gotten repaid with that money, and anything that he eats, that he continues to eat, would be considered ribis, and it's avok ribis, and that can't be extracted from him, and therefore, if he ate more than the $1,000, lo mafkinan mine, we can't take that away from him because that's avok ribis, and we can't force him to pay back avok ribis. V'lo mechashvinu mishtar l'shtar, and also if there was another outstanding loan from Shimon to Ruvain, that additional fruits that he ate cannot go towards the repayment of that other loan, because that would also be considered extracting from Shimon, and it's avok ribis, and we cannot extract avok ribis from Shimon. However, if it is orphans, and Beis Din has a special responsibility to look out for the interest of orphans. Now, I don't know, maybe it's talking about, I don't know exactly how this scenario would be. Maybe their father had borrowed money from Shimon. Maybe their father was Reuven and had borrowed money from Shimon. Then Reuven dies and now they inherit the field, but the field is a mashkanta. Maybe that's the scenario. And anyways, so in that case, Beis Din has a special responsibility to look out for the best interests of the orphans. And therefore, as I pointed out a minute ago, when it comes to, so when Shimon eats, let's say $1,500 worth of produce, of Paris, so Reuven should have evicted Shimon once he hit 1,000, but he didn't, and therefore what goes above and beyond is considered ribis and is not collectible. But in looking out for the best interests of the orphans, we view it as if Shimon has been evicted immediately once he crossed the $1,000 threshold, and anything that he keeps on eating is theft. And theft can be repaid, can be forced to be repaid, right? So achol shir zuze misalkinon le, if he eats, the $1,000 worth of Paris, so we immediately evict him. Achal tfein, anything more that he eats, mafkinun mine, is considered theft, and we could take it away from him. Michashvinon mishtar l'shtara, and if there are other outstanding debts, whatever additional fruits that Shimon ate would be counted towards those additional debts. Amr Rav Ashi says, I don't buy this. We can't have it both ways, right? Meaning, the way that we just explained it now was like kind of a funny way, which was like, on the one hand, Shimon's eating from the field, and we're not treating it as ribis. We're evaluating how much money it is, and we're considering that as repayment for the loan. Yet once he crosses $1,000, at that point we start treating it as ribis. Rav Ashi says no. If we're treating it as ribis, we're treating it as ribis the entire time, and therefore it's like Shimon basically wants to argue, which is look, I lent Ruvain $1,000. He needs to pay me back $1,000. All this Paris that I'm eating, it's ribis. I'm a bad guy, I know, but this stuff that I'm eating, it's basically interest, and it's avok ribis, and you can't take it away from me, any of it. All of the fruits that I'm eating are above and beyond the $1,000 that I will receive in return. It's all ribis, and none of it can be taken away from me. Right, so Amr Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi, Hashda da Amart, once you've said, Ochal Tvei lo mafkinon mine, that if he eats more than the $1,000 of the loan, you can't take that additional fruits away from him because it's avok ribis and you can't extract it from him. So achol shi'ur zuze nami lo misalkinon le below zuze. Well, if that's the case, then all of it, even the initial $1,000 worth of fruits, should be considered ribis, and it's avok ribis, and that also cannot be taken away from him and cannot be considered part of the repayment of the loan. Right, so again, achol shir zuze, even when he's eating the principle of $1,000, nami lo misalkinon le, we can't evict him below zuze without Reuven paying him back. Reuven will still have to pay back the loan, and whatever Shimon ate is considered ribis, and it's avok ribis, and it can't be taken away from Shimon. My time how come saluke below zuze afuke mine hu, because if we were to basically say that, where am I? Saluke below zuze afuke minehu, because if we were to take that, so let's go weiter for a second. Have avok ribis, but this is avok ribis, v'avok ribis eno yotze b'dayon, and you can't take it away from him. Meaning, if we were to say that the $1,000 worth of Paris that Shimon ate is going to go towards paying, basically repayment of his loan, so then we're basically taking those fruits away from him to pay back as payment for the loan, and now Reuben doesn't need to actually pay back the loan because it's already been paid through those fruits. That means that we're taking those fruits that Shimon ate away from him, but this is avok ribis, and avok ribis can't be taken away from him, and therefore, basically, what Rav Ashi is saying is that if we're saying that once you hit the $1,000 threshold, at that point it can't be extracted from him because it's avok ribis, well, none of it should be able to be extracted from him because it's all avok ribis, and therefore Reuven is still going to have to pay back the debt, and we can't take any of it away from Shimon because it's avok ribis, and avok ribis can't be extracted by judges. So there was once a scenario with Yisomim, with orphans, with young orphans, and he made them, and he treated them as adults, meaning, because according to Rav Ashi, there is no, according to, who was the first one? According to Marbraid to Rav Yosef, I think that's who it was, he had this whole cheshbon where really we're evaluating how much he ate and using that to pay back the loan, and then the question is, do we view it like, do we consider him to be evicted immediately, in which case it's theft, or do we say that no, if he didn't evict him immediately, then it's ribis? So we say that by a non-orphan, we would treat it as ribis, and he wouldn't be able to extract the additional stuff, but by Yisomim, we'll consider it as theft because he's automatically evicted. So that's only possible when you're saying that we're kind of viewing the first $1,000 worth of fruits that he ate as repayment of the loan. But according to Rav Ashi, we don't know. It's all just avok ribis, and none of it can be extracted, even if it's for orphans, sadly. But the fact of the matter is, it's all avok ribis according to Rav Ashi, and none of it can be, avok ribis can't be taken away can't be forced to be paid back by judges, no matter what. Right, so therefore, even though they were Yisomim Ketanim, they basically had the same halachas as anybody else, as Gedolim, as adults, as anybody else, and none of the fruits that he ate would be able to be, used for any sort of repayment. Rav Breder of Yosef says, Rav Breder of Yosef, Mishmei de Rave. Was that the same person we had before? Mar Breder of Yosef, Mishmei de Rave. Maybe they changed it. Rav Breder of Yosef. Okay, sure, it's the same person. Rav Breder of Yosef, Mishmei de Rave. Hamashkanta be'asra de misalke lo nechol ela ben achyosa v'tzur b'merabanan afilu ben achyosa lo nechol. Okay, says Rav Breder of Yosef, Mishmei de Rave, that when it comes to a mashkanta, so ba'asr de misalke. Okay, so remember, if it's a place where the loan cannot be repaid until the predetermined time, so we said that at that point, and only at that point, is the loan repaid, and the field goes back to Reuven. And in the meantime, it's Shimon's. Right? There's no question. Of course, Shimon can eat from the fruits in that scenario. But in a place where the Reuven can repay the loan at any time and evict Shimon at any time, so Shimon does it. It's not considered that Shimon owns the field. So in order for Shimon to be able to eat from the field, as it's in his possession as a mashkanta, in order for Shimon to be able to eat from the field, so he can't just eat from it, because then it would be ribis. So what he can do is he can, for each year that he wants to eat from the field, he basically pays like a symbolic amount. It basically, reduces a symbolic amount from the loan, and that he's basically, with that symbolic amount, he's buying access to the fruits of that field. Now, in most cases, I don't know exactly how much this symbolic amount is, but okay, if it's an $1,000 loan, I don't know, maybe $50 for the year. I mean, $50 for a year's worth of produce in a field is probably going to be a huge bargain. At the same time, though, if it's a drought or a terrible year and mamish the field produces zilch, so then he loses. So meaning it's not, so it's not like we've said in the past that somebody, if Shimon lent money to Reuven, he can't get discounts on things. Reuven can't give him discounts on things because we're concerned about ribis. This isn't strictly speaking a discount. Most likely it's probably a steep discount. Hopefully the field's going to produce a lot more than $50. But if there's a drought or something and it doesn't produce anything, well then he loses the $50. So it's not exactly a discount. There's some risk involved, and therefore Shimon basically pays like a symbolic amount to Reuven. He basically deducts it from the loan, and for that sort of symbolic amount, Shimon can eat from the field. Okay. So again, Amarav Breder of Yosef Mishmei de Rave. Hai mashkante, when it comes to this mashkante, be'asad de misalke, in a place where the minig is that Reuven can pay back the loan at any time and get his field back and evict Shimon from the field. Lo nechol ela ben achyosa, for Shimon to be able to eat from the field, to eat the pears of the field, he has to, basically deduct a symbolic amount from the loan, and by doing so, he now has rights to the fruits of the field. But But if he's a Talmud Chacham, if Shimon's a Talmud Chacham, then he shouldn't do this. He shouldn't eat with this. He shouldn't do this practice. Ella, but my nechol. Well, then how can a tzurba merabanan then be able to eat from the fruits of a mashkanta field if he had lent money? B'kitzusa, he's got to do this kitzusa thing. This kitzusa thing, which we'll explain what that is in a second. Some like fixed value thing. Well, that makes sense if you hold that kitzusa is permitted. But if you hold that kitzusa is forbidden, so then what? The itmar, because after all it was stated, meaning if you say kitzusa is not allowed, then how can then what would be the way that a Talmud Chacham would be able to eat from a mashkanta? The itmar was stated kitzusa. When it comes to kitzusa, pligeba. Rav Acha and Ravina argue about what this is. And the art scroll I pointed out, I'm relying heavily, by the way, on the art scroll for these dafs, because there is so much context that you need to know, like even just like about these mashkantas and the ones that they can be paid back at any time or have to be paid back at the fixed time. I mean, to try to understand that from Rashi, I didn't have that much success. There's a lot of notes in the art scroll on this stuff. There's just so much context that needs to be understood to even get an entry point into understanding these Gemaras. So one of the notes in the art scroll, I had pointed out a Gemara from Psachim, which said that whenever you have a machlokas between Rav Acha and Ravina, Ravina is the more lenient opinion. So Pligi bar Rav Acha, Ravina, machlokas Rav Acha, Ravina, Chad Omar, one of them says, Kitzusa Sharia, that this Kitzusa thing is permitted. V'chad kitzusa asira, whereas the other one says that kitzusa is forbidden. And I guess that Ravina would be the one who says it's permitted, and Rav Acha would be the one who says it's forbidden. Heichi dami kitzusa. Now, what is kitzusa? And we have two options for what kitzusa can be. De Omar le ad chomish shnin achilna la below nachyasa mikan va'elach shaimana lach kulu peri. Okay. So one way to understand kitzusa is in the following way. Shimon the Talmud Chacham lends $1,000 to Reuven, and I guess the deal is that Reuven's going to pay it back in 10 years from now. And remember, this is this is the kind of thing where Reuven could redeem it at any time, right? So now. But because if he could only redeem it after 10 years, then it's basically Shimon owns it. During that time, he can do whatever he wants. So now they make this kitzusa thing, which is that for the first 5 years, Shimon can basically eat to his heart's delight, and for the second 5 years, Shimon has to pay for every single fruit that he eats. It's basically a kind of reconfigured sharecropping agreement, right? Sharecropping agreement is basically every single year the sharecropper gets a certain percentage of the field. Here this is a little bit different, that Shimon for a certain number of years, where the Gemara is saying 5, but it could be any number, whatever they agree to, for a certain number of years, Shimon can eat to his heart's delight, to his heart's content, and after that he would have to pay Reuven for everything that he eats, and this is that, and they make this kind of an agreement, and with such an agreement, so basically Shimon the Talmud Chacham lent $1,000 to Reuven, and Reuven gave Shimon a mashkanta, and in order for Shimon to be able to eat from the field, they basically, for the mashkanta, they basically make a separate kind of sharecropper agreement, and that's completely fine and acceptable. Okay, so again, Heichidami kitzusa, what is this kitzusa? The Amarle, that Shimon the Talmud Chacham says to Reuven, Ad chomesh shnin, that for the first 5 years, Achilna la below nachyasa, I'll eat from the mashkanta, from the field, without paying anything. But mikan ve'elach, but from then on, shaimana lach kulu pere, I will pay in full for anything that I eat. So some kind of like a share arrangement. Those who say kol below nachyosa aser. The other way of understanding that, of this understanding kitzusa, is that no. There's no chance that Shimon should be able to eat for a certain amount of years from this mashkanta, just to his heart's content. Aval heichidami kitzusa. So then, what's kitzusa? The amarle ad chamesh shnin achilna ben achyasa. That for the first 5 years I will eat from the mashkanta and I will pay a symbolic amount in order to be able to eat from it. And then mikan ve'elach, once this period is over, shaiman alach kulu pere, then I will pay for you for all of the fruits. Okay, so we basically have 3 kind of things when it comes to this mashkanta, right? 3 kinds of setups. Well, 4 kind of, right? Meaning there's the one with the predetermined time and the loan cannot be repaid early. So in that scenario, Shimon owns the field and can do whatever he wants. Now we have 3 scenarios when it comes to the loan that can be repaid at any time, and Shimon can be evicted at any time. One of them is the non-Talmud Chacham scenario, which is basically every single year, no matter how long it is, every single year he pays a symbolic amount and then he can eat, whatever he wants. The first way to understand kitzusa for a Talmud Chacham is that for a certain number of years, the Talmud Chacham, Shimon can basically eat whatever he wants, but after that he has to pay for everything in full. And the third way to understand kitzusa, the second way to understand kitzusa, the third scenario for this mashkanta type of mashkanta, which is that for a certain number of years, Shimon has basically the nachyosa scenario, which is that he has to pay a symbolic amount and then he can eat as much as he wants. After that, he would have to pay in full, and that would be acceptable for a Talmud Chacham. Now, if you say that that's allowed, so now manda also become Isa. So Rav Acha, who says that kitzusa is aser, so based on the first way that we explained kitzusa, which is that he can eat to his heart's content for 5 years and then he's got to pay for everything. So Rav Acha, who says that that's aser, so Shari b'Basraisa, he would concede though that if for the first 5 years he can pay for this symbolic, pay this symbolic or deduct this symbolic amount from the loan, and then after that he would have to pay in full, and therefore, so according to that. So according to Rav Acha, that would be acceptable as a kitzusa for Talmud Chacham. But manda also b'Basraisa, but based on the way that we explain, the latter way that we explained kitzusa, which is that he pays a symbolic amount for a certain number of years, and then he has to pay in full after that. If Rav Acha says that is forbidden too, well then, heichi shari lemechol, how can a Talmud Chacham then eat from a mashkanta? So shari ki mashkanta disura. Well, there's another option with mashkanta, which is mashkanta disura. Dekasve bahachi b'mishlam shnaya ilain tepuk arada below kesef. What they say in the mashkanta disura is that there's a predetermined amount of years that he can eat from, that Shimon can eat from the mashkanta, and after that they're even. After that, the loan is considered paid back, and after that, it's considered paid back, and Reuven doesn't pay Shimon anything. So basically, Shimon lends Reuven $1,000. Reuven gives Shimon a mashkanta, and that basically means that for a predetermined amount of time, Shimon can eat from the field as much as he wants. After that, the loan is considered paid, and it's done. So there isn't the scenario where Shimon's lending Reuven $1,000, Reuven's paying back Shimon $1,000, plus Shimon's been eating from the field, and how do we deal with that? No, Reuven doesn't actually pay back Shimon $1,000. Shimon eats from the field for this amount of time, and then they're even, and that is basically the repayment of the loan. So again, kimashkanta desura, right? The Talmud Chacham would be allowed to eat from the mashkanta, like the mashkanta desura, the kasve ba hachi, that they write like this, b'mishlam shnaya ilain, at the end of this predetermined number of years, tepok ara da below kesef, this mashkanta will go back to Reuven. Reuven doesn't need to pay any money and we'll call it even. Rav Papa Rav Huna Breder of Yoshua Amri Tarvayu Hai Mashkanta, that when it comes to Mashkanta, Be'asra de Misalke, in a place where Reuven could pay back Shimon at any time and evict him from his Mashkanta, from his field. Ein Balchov Gove Heimenu. Okay, so again, in that scenario, Shimon doesn't own the field. In the scenario where Reuven cannot repay it early and evict Shimon, he has to wait the full time. Well, we said in that case, Shimon's basically buying the field during that time, and it's his. And then Reuven basically buys it back from Shimon. But in a place where Reuven can pay back the loan at any time, it doesn't belong to Shimon. So again, Rav Papa Rav Huna Breder of Yoshua Amri Tavayu Hai Mashkanta, that when it comes to a Mashkanta, Ba'asur de Misalke, in a place where Reuven could basically repay the loan at any time and evict Shimon. Ein Balchov Gove Menu, so any creditor of Shimon's cannot pay himself back from this Mashkanta. Ve'ena Bechor, or right, so I think if Shimon dies, basically any creditor would not be able to say, oh, well, there's this field. No, it's not, a creditor would not be able to collect from this field. Ve'ena Bechor Notel Ba Pishnayim, and it would not be considered inheritance that a firstborn would collect a double portion from. V'shvius mishamatza, and it's not considered a collateral that would prevent Shemitah from releasing the loan, right? If there was, let's go weiter for a second. Uvasher de lo misalke, misalke. Now, in a place, however, where the loan cannot be repaid early, and therefore there's a predetermined amount of time that Shimon is essentially buying the field for, well, then he owns it during that time, and I guess if he dies, it sounds like if he dies, then basically it sounds like Reuven doesn't necessarily have an opportunity to buy it back, I guess. And then, so Balchov Gove Menu, a creditor would be able to collect from this field. Uvechor Notabo Pishnayim, and the firstborn would be able to collect his double portion from it. Vein Shvius Mishamatza, and on account of this Mashkanta, Shemitah would not reset the loan. Although I guess that sounds like the loan then still stands. Meaning, so Shimon lent Reuven $1,000, and then there's this predetermined mashkanta. So then I guess maybe as long as Shimon's alive, I guess. So then the it will just continue like a regular loan, and at the end of the predetermined amount of time, I guess Reuven would buy it back from Shimon. But I guess if Shimon dies, then maybe things kind of get messed up. All right. Mishmei dirav popei mashkanta be'asur de misalke. Okay, that when it comes to a mashkanta, in a place where Reuven can repay the loan early, misalke le vafilu mitamre de abuja. When Reuven comes to pay back the loan early, Shimon must leave the premises, and even if there are dates that are already on the mats, that they've already been knocked off the tree and they're on the mats, Shimon must leave immediately. He can't take those dates. But if he had already put that, if he had already picked them up in a basket, and so then kananu, then he was koneh ba'agba. And according to the opinion who says, we've seen this opinion before, that vessels of the purchaser in the domain of the seller can be purchased by the purchaser, right? So meaning if I go into a store with a box and I plop something into a box, so I could be koneh in my box even though I'm in somebody else's store. So here also Shimon needs to leave, but the dates are on his mat. So even though it's Reuven's field again, or even though it's Reuven's field and Shimon has to get out of it, but since his dates are already on his mat, so then they belong to him already. So then afilu lo agbahanu besisnei kananu, even though he didn't pick it up yet in a basket, but it's on his mats. If you say that kelev shalokeh b'shus mocher koneh lokeach, so then they would be his as well. Pshita ba'asur de misalke Ve'amar lo mistalakna, hakam lo mistalakna. So certainly in a place, the misalke, where the minig is that Reuven could repay the loan at any time. So basically, Shimon is lending $1,000 to Reuven, and Reuven is providing a mashkanta. And the minig in that place is that at any time Reuven could, repay the loan and get back his field. But Shimon, who's providing the money, however, says, "Wait, that doesn't work for me. I'm giving you money. I can be kone karka bekesef, right? Bekesef shtar b'chazaka. So Shimon says, look, let me tell you what's happening. I'm giving you money, and I'm purchasing your field for a predetermined amount of time, and you can't buy it back from me until that time." So then that works, because kesef can be kone karka, and Shimon says, "This is what I'm doing. I'm right now being kone your karka for 3 years. You could be kone karka for 3 years, and that'll work." Okay, I guess it won't be considered a regular mashkanta. It will be considered, he's basically saying, "Look, this is how this loan is going to work," or I guess it's not even necessarily a loan. Shimon's basically saying, "This is how it's going to work. Reuven, you want $1,000? I'm going to buy your field for 3 years or 5 years or however long for $1,000. You'll buy it back from me at the end, and that's acceptable." Okay, so Pshita certainly Ba'asher the Misalke, in a place where generally Reuven would be able to pay back the loan at any time and evict Shimon. Ve'amar lo mistalakna, but Shimon says at the time that he gives Reuven the money, he says, "Look, I'm not interested in that. I don't want that one day you're just going to show up and evict me. I'm happy to give you $1,000, but I do want to be guaranteed the mashkanta for a certain amount of time." Well, that's acceptable. I mean, Shimon said, "Look, this is the deal. I'm buying your field for a certain amount of time, and that's what we're doing." But what about in a place where the minig is that Shimon, that Reuven cannot repay early, rather it's a predetermined amount of time. Shimon owns the property for that amount of time. What if Shimon says, for whatever reason, what if Shimon says, "Look, but you know what? I'm happy if you want. I'm happy to have an arrangement where you could pay me back whenever you want, and I'll skedaddle. I don't have a problem with that." So what happens in that case? It sounds like basically Shimon's like being nice. So tzarich lemikna mine olo. Do they need to make a kinyan on it to make it official? I guess that would mean that basically, Reuven would probably. I think the point is that Reuven is kind of going to show that he's serious, that he means business, that he's official, and I think the point is that he would kind of pick up a sudar, and he would make a kinyan sudar, and then it would be official, and then even though the minig in that place is that the mashkanta would be for a predetermined amount of time, and Reuven can't repay early and get back his field, since they made a kinyan on it, Reuven, it's official, and they could do it the other way, where Reuven can pay back early and get back his field at any time. Okay, so do we need that kinyan sudar or not? Where am I? Okay, so Rav Papa Amar Lo Tzarich Lemikna Minei. Rav Papa says we don't need a kinyan. Rav Sheshes Brei Rav Idi Amar Tzarich Lemikna Minei. We would need a kinyan. V'chsa Tzarich Lemikna Minei. The halacha is that we would need to make a kinyan. Omar, if Reuven, so in a place where Reuven can repay the loan at any time and evict Shimon, so Amar Ezel v'Aisi Zuzeh, if he says to Shimon, "Hey Shimon," right? Shimon wakes up one day, Reuven comes over, says, "Shimon, I'm going to get my money right now and I'm paying you back right now." Lo achil, Shimon can no longer eat from the field. Ezel v'Atrach v'Aisi Zuzeh. What if Reuven says though, "Look, I'm good. That's it. I want to pay this. I want to pay you back. I want to get back my field. I'm going to work. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to do some work. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to pay you back." So Ravina Amar Achil. Ravina says, "Okay, I mean, it's not exactly the same thing as I'm going, I'm just going to the ATM and taking out some money and you paying you back. It's a little bit of a longer process." Ravina says that Shimon can continue eating from the field. So, meaning I guess probably ben Achyos or whatever. So Umar Zutra Breder of Mari Omar Lo Achil. Umar Zutra Breder of Mari says no, you can no longer eat from the field. Vilchsa Lo Achil. The lach is he can no longer eat from the field. Rav Kana Rav Papa Rav Ashi Lo Achli ben Achyos. So Rav Kana, Rav Papa and Rav Ashi would not eat by ben Achyos. I think it's ben Chaisa maybe. Ben Chaisa, I think maybe, is that the official way to say it? bin Chaisa. All right, let's say that. Bin Chaisa. So if kind of a papa of Ashi lo achli bin Chaisa, they would not do nechaisa, because after all, we said earlier that Talmidei Chacham don't do nechaisa; they do kitzusa. Ravina achli ben nechaisa. Ravina was very humble. He didn't want to, view himself as like a Talmid Chacham, put himself in his, his own category. He would do like the regular people. He would eat from the mashkanta ben nechaisa. Amar my zutra, my time of the man to achli ben nechaisa. What would be the reason for it? The man to Amar would say that. You can eat from the mashkanta ben chaisa by giving the symbolic amount for each year. Just like a steachuza. Right? If a person is makdish his field to the Beis HaMikdash, so he buys it back, he's pod to the hektish at a predetermined rate of about a sela per year. Now, a sela per year is a nominal amount. The field might produce hopefully a lot more than that, but you pay a symbolic amount. Even though the field produces tons and tons and tons of fruits, the Torah says, redeem it for 4 zuz. 4 zuz is a sela, right? 4 dinars is a sela, right? So redeem it for 4 zuz, around 4 zuz. So achanami loshna. So it's a similar thing over here. You pay a symbolic amount, and then you can eat from the field. Uman de Osir. According to the opinion, says nechaisa doesn't work. Amar lach will say, look, steachuza hektishi v'achmano ukme apidjin. Look, steachuza is its own thing. It's its own category, right? The Torah tells you that when it comes to hektish, this is how you can be pod the hektish. But here it's a we're talking about a loan over here. It's a different sugya. We're talking about a loan, and if you kind of are eating from the field, it looks like ribbis and it shouldn't be done. Omer Ravashi says, Ravashi, Omerli Sovi de Matamachasya, that the elders of Matamachasya said to me, Stam Mashkanta Shata, that Stam a Mashkanta is for a year. The Ma'anaf Kamina, what's the difference? The Ochil La Shata Motzi Masalik Le, that once Shimon has had the field for a year, Ruvain can repay him and evict him. Below, but if it has not yet been a year, Lo Motzi Masalik Le, Ruvain cannot evict Shimon. Meaning, even in a place where Reuven can repay the loan early and evict Shimon, it would only be after a year. The Amr Ravashi says, Ravashi Amrli Savi Matamachasya, my mashkanta. What does a mashkanta mean? The shchuna gabe, that the neighborhood or something, that the living on it is with him. The Ma'anaf mean, what does that mean? The dina de BavaMetzia. For the lachas of dina de BavaMetzia, I think we're going to learn about it later on. Is be'etzem, if a person has if the person's selling his house or something, or his field, he should give the first, he should give priority to his neighbors to allow them to buy it over, at the same price that other people would be willing to pay for it. It doesn't have to lose money, but priority goes to a neighbor. So what we're saying is that the person who, the Shimon, who has this mashkanta, should have priority on being able to buy the field if Reuven wants to sell it. All right. Wow. Friends, oh my gosh, that was the Samach Zayin of Masechta BavaMetzia. Wow. Wow. Okay, look, we talked about, oh my gosh, what did we even talk about? So at the beginning we talked about like, oh my gosh, right there, it was Navla and her cousin and interest and Avak Ribis versus Ribis Ktsutsa and how we think about that scenario, whatever. Then we got to Mashkantas and how those work. Oh my gosh, when basically Shimon lends money to Reuven and then Reuven provides a property as a collateral, and then can Shimon eat from the field? Can he not eat from the field? How can he eat from the field? We got into Nechaisa and to pay an objective amount, but there's also the distinction between, is it a place where basically Shimon owns the field for a certain amount of time, in which case he could basically, and then Reuven buys it back from him, in which case he could do whatever he wants in the field, or is it a scenario where Reuven could buy it back at any time, and then Shimon would have to pay this kind of objective amount. Talmidei Chacham would do this kind of kitzusa thing. There were these two ways of kitzusa. One was basically that Shimon can eat the fruits for a certain amount of time, then he has to pay for the fruits for the rest of the amount of time. The other one was that Shimon could basically do nechaisa for a certain amount of time, then he has to pay in full for the rest of the time. Wow. Oh my gosh. All sorts of details about ribis. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.